Hello everybody. In this update of YouTube presentation from Lakshya Management Consultant Private Limited, we are going to talk about a very important aspect of your overall ISO certification project. The most critical, central, time consuming but rewarding, that is documentation. You take any ISO standard, be it ISO 9001, 14001, 18001, 22000, 27000, S8000, OSHA's 18001, ISO 17025, you take any ISO standard, one of the most important requirement would be compliance to documentation. Now from our global experience of working with more than 50 countries, we have seen that in majority of the cases, the intent of the standard has been compromised with. Why? Because the documentation was not prepared, designed or implemented in a way it should have been. What is the objective of the standard? This is what is the biggest problem companies face. Lot of people think due to the consultant not guiding them properly or their ignorance, lot of people feel that ISO standard, ISO certification, ISO implementation is all about documentation. That is not true, my dear friend. Documentation is just a tool to help you reach your goal of standardization and business performance improvement. It is not the end. Documentation is a means. Using documentation, you can reach your goal of business excellence and continual improvement. We have seen in lot of cases wherein company is not able to yield or get the desired benefit out of ISO certification. Not because people are not competent, they are very competent. Not because they don't know the standard. They might be knowing all the requirements of the standard, but they fail to achieve the desired benefit out of the ISO implementation because the way documentation system was planned, designed and implemented was not in line with company's business policies. There are so many cut copy paste consultants available in the market who believe one head fits all. If you happen to work with this kind of people, this kind of consultant, only God can save your ISO project and benefit that you might get out of it. So what we do is, as the leading and largest ISO consulting company, you need to make sure that documentation what you design is user friendly, is lean, is well integrated with your management system and company's operating environment, and at the same time is simple to maintain. Now let's talk about the documentation that you need to comply with and what kind of documentation you should create. Now when a company starts an ISO certification project, the departmental heads, ISO process representatives or process managers, the management representative or ISO manager will have a lot of questions in their mind. Questions like, what should be documented? How many SOPs are to be prepared? How many procedures are to be prepared? Who should sign a document? Who should sign a procedure? Shall I document every activity I do? Shall I prepare a checklist for each and every inspection that I do? I have got 50 processes in my company, shall I make 50 standard operating procedures? How big a document should be? Who all should be given a copy of the documentation? Can I keep my documentation online? How many pages a procedure or manual should be made of? There are so many questions you might have in your mind. Let me demystify it all for you. Because we believe that an effective ISO system implementation and resultant benefit can only be achieved if you can plan your documentation properly. So for any ISO standard under consideration, what I am going to tell you holds true. Have a policy first, because that is a mandatory requirement for all ISO standards. Now this policy can be quality policy for ISO 9001, environment policy for ISO 14001, health safety policy for OSHA's 18001, or information security policy for 27001, food safety policy for 22000, and so on. Have a policy that meets all the requirement of the standard clauses. Communicate it to everybody in the company and make sure it is understood by everybody. Now next important requirement would be process definition. Now this is where people feel little confused. We have seen so many companies, even after 2, 3, 4 years of successful certification and recertification and continual yearly surveillance audits, they do not understand process approach. Very fundamental, very important for a documentation. If you want to achieve effective ISO documentation, it has to be on the basis of process approach. So what do we mean by process? What is the process? Process means a set of interrelated activities that will convert an input into an output. Sounds confusing? No, it is not. Let me tell you how simple it is. It is not confusing at all. What you need to do is, if you want to identify how many processes you have in your company, first of all, divide your company into departments. Let's say company ABC, it has got 6 departments. HR department, marketing department, purchase, operations, logistics, and quality. Now for the sake of understanding for you all, if you are from technical background or non-technical background, let's take HR department as an example for process definition so that you all can correlate. In a typical HR department, there can be processes like recruitment, induction, training, salary management, performance appraisal, exit full final settlement, or any other activity or process that a company does. So simple question you need to ask to yourself, how many specific, distinguished, separate activities do I have in my department? You will get a list. That becomes a process. Now sometimes you might even divide a process into sub-process. Like I discussed about recruitment process. Now recruitment process can be subdivided into a sub-processes like application management, interview scheduling, HR interview, technical interview, final interview, salary negotiation, issuance of offer letter, and appointment letter. So this can be sub-process in the recruitment process. You need to take a call. Do I just restrict myself to macro level process definition, or I go to a micro process definition? Our advice is, if you are starting new, You don't have any ISO or formal process system in your company already, do not go to microprocess definition. Just restrict yourself to process definition at macro level. HR department, you will have 6 process. Purchase department, you might have 5 process. Operations, you might have 6 process. Quality, you might have 4 process, and so on. That is process. Now what do you do with all this process definition? Your entire documentation will revolve around this. For every process, it is expected that you have a standard operating procedure, even though it is not mandatory. It is nowhere written in any standards that for every process you should have a procedure. Again, this is a miscommunication or confusion people have, that every process you have, you prepare a procedure. Not required. Standard does not tell you that. What standard says is, there are 2 kinds of procedures. One is a documented procedure and second is just procedure. It can be documented, might not be documented. But a good practice is, you document your procedures, document your processes, so that it can help you in your standardization drive. Now every process you have, there are 4 attributes associated to each process. Process input. What do you mean by process input? Process input means that particular information, that particular document, that particular sample or raw material or material that comes to you only after you can start that process. So you should identify what do you receive before you start the process execution. What do you receive? Who sends you that? How does it come to you? Then you start your process. Then you have your process output. After your process execution is over, what do you generate? Who do you give it to? And how do you give it to? And finally, most important part is effectiveness evaluation of the process. Why are you doing this entire ISO? What benefit do you get? If you want to measure that, you should measure effectiveness of the process. Because in ISO we say, in quality language we say, that if you cannot measure something, you can never improve it. So for improvement purpose, measurement is mandatory. So you should identify parameters, 1, 2 or multiple, for each of the processes. If I want to identify or evaluate effectiveness of this process, what parameter can I use? How frequently I will evaluate? Who will evaluate it? That becomes your process definition. And then you should try to create a linkage between the processes. That becomes a process mapping. Interaction of the process. Now once you are through with this activity, very critical activity, spend sufficient amount of time for this activity. Lot of time we have seen that because of improper advice from their respective consultants, companies do not spend any time at all on process definition. It's just a 1 page that is given to them by the consultant, which has got some kind of graphical representation and some flowchart, and they change the name, that becomes the process definition. Please refrain from doing this. It will not help you, it will not serve you any purpose. Your ISO process implementation must start with process definition. Involve everybody. Try to get their views. This is the best time wherein while doing ISO you can even re-engineer your process. You might identify, oh, this process is not adding any value. Let's bypass it. Let's introduce a new process let's introduce a new process. Or let's rework on this process so that we work on eliminating the time wastage or the process wastage. There are so many opportunities it will open for you. Only when you spend time on process definition and involve everybody. So our advice is, kindly take this seriously, spend time on process definition. That will go a long way in helping you put a strong process and ISO management system in place. After you do this, coming to the generic documentation, what you should be following is your manuals. Now, apart from few of the standards like ISO 9001, wherein it is categorically written and mentioned about requirement of a quality manual, apart from this, there are so many other standards wherein it is not specifically categorically mentioned that a manual should be ready. Like for example, ISO 14001 standard. It is nowhere written in the standard that you should have an environment manual. ISO 22000 standard. It is nowhere written you should have a food safety manual. But a good practice is to have a manual, so that you can work on the overall standardization approach. So work on the manual for the respective standards. Now another myth people have is, that is because of a long history the way manuals have been prepared since inception of ISO standard. 80% of the manuals what you see would be a replica of the standard. What is the point of doing that? Your standard which you refer it, why do copy it and call it as a manual? Lot of people make manuals exactly the way the standards are written. No problem into that, you can do that. But kindly do not copy the exact lines and the sentences of the standard. Rather than that, write what you are doing in your company against that particular requirement. That will help you. Not just reproduce the standard with some minor modifications. So please use your expertise, your judgment, and involve everybody to draft and prepare a good manual that can become an asset for a company. Now coming to the most important part of the documentation, SOP, Standard Operating Procedure. Now people have a lot of questions when it comes to SOP. The most general question is, how many SOPs we should prepare? Should we prepare SOPs for every activity we have, every process we have? Our answer is technically no. You are free to identify how many processes you need to document in terms of the standard operating procedure. Ask a question to yourself. Of the 20 processes I have in my company, how many are critical most? Cover them into your SOP preparation first. Our advice is to make SOPs for every process. It's a one-time activity, but it will go a long way in creating a standardization culture in the company. Let's take a simple example of McDonald's. You go to McDonald's anywhere in the world. Go to McDonald's in USA, in UAE, in Australia, in India, or any other countries. The way they will greet you, the way they will take your order, the way they will have the burger preparations or fries preparation in the kitchen backside, the way they will take your payment, the way they will serve you burger, the way they will say you buy when you leave the restaurant is same. Because of this, what happens? As a customer, you get similar experience every time. How did they make this happen? By identifying processes they have in the McDonald's restaurant, front office and back office, and then creating a strong procedures for all the processes. Once they made the processes, it was documented, and then a training is given to all the employees so that the activity